Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper. And today I have Tucker Wannamaker on the podcast. And I'm so excited because I heard of him and his amazing organization, Thrive Impact, and we did a 3-day retreat, the ACLE Awakening Unconscious Leadership, or Conscious Leadership, I should say, training. And it was just eye-opening for me. And I just love that he embodies this work. A little bit about Tucker. Like I mentioned, he is the CEO of Thrive Impact, and he is working to right the injustices happening against nonprofit leaders and solve nonprofit leader burnout for those in some of the toughest leadership conditions. Burnout is the enemy of creating positive change. We must honor nonprofit leaders and the impact we all want to have by investing in their leadership. Well, this is going to be a good conversation. We have a lot in common. He facilitates transformational leadership development training, strategic planning, and community experiences that unlock the best in nonprofit leaders and the collective wisdom of nonprofit teams. For the last 15 years, Tucker has been in the trenches of community work and nonprofits as a leader inside of Ashoka, Character.org, and Youth Service America as a founder of a nonprofit called Wildfire Teas, leading them to $1 million in revenue in the first year, and developing leadership development programs and fundraising campaigns for nonprofit clients like the Red Cross, United States Olympic Museum, Greater Nashua Mental Health, Pikes Peak Community Foundation, and Colorado College. A little bit about Tucker personally. He rides a old 1980 Vespa.
Yeah,
he has
right.
4 kids that are radical. He loves taking them skiing, bike riding, and kayaking. It's the Colorado in him.
That's true.
The best, his wife, 18 years into it, and she gets more lovely every year. Hashtag not even joking. Oh, that's such a sweet sentiment. And the quote that he loves is, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them a task and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I love that quote. Well, thank you, Tucker, so much for taking my email and being willing to be on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Haley. Thank you for all that you're doing to help fundraisers be better, for your work around conscious leadership as well.
Well, I'm just so excited to have this conversation because I know we met a few weeks ago when we just had so many synergies and alignment in the work that we do. We approached it a little bit differently. So I would love to know a little bit more about your background. And do you have an experience of burnout as a nonprofit leader that led you to start Thrive Impact that helped nonprofit leaders prevent experiencing burnout?
Yeah, I do. My brief background, you hit on some of it. I actually come from the real estate world, and then I started a marketing company. I don't even know how long ago it was at this point, 15 years ago, maybe. And we started doing campaigns for nonprofits and community activism work in Colorado Springs specifically. And then the wildfires, as you were mentioning in Wildfire Teas, we ended up creating a nonprofit. We weren't planning to. We were raising money for wildfire relief efforts. and ended up selling over $1 million of t-shirts in a little over a year.
Wow.
And it was like boot camp for nonprofit work. And so I was like, oh, how do you set up a 501c3? What is a 501c3? Knowing that nonprofits are not business models, they're tax statuses. And that's a really important thing. But I was starting to learn a lot of that back when we were setting this up. What's the purpose of a board? How do you give money away? That's a really tough thing, actually, when you think about it, of how do you honor donors' intent? And when you have people buying $20 t-shirts from around the whole world, literally, how do you honor the intent of donors? And also got into a variety of other things like, what is philanthropy? Is that for those rich people over there, or is that for everybody? A lot of fascinating things. And so I just really was hooked in the nonprofit space, and then ended up moving with my wife and kids to DC, Washington, DC, and ended up selling the company and going full on into one of our clients, which was character.org. And that was a nonprofit that worked in the world of character education. And so I really just dove headfirst into nonprofit work. And for me, looking for more impact, like I loved it. I was hungry for it. I'm an idealist by nature as well. And so I was like, yes, this is what the world ought to be, as all these different things I was doing in nonprofits, looking for more of this meaning. And what I ended up finding was really deep burnout. And one of the organizations in particular. And as I've unpacked it a little bit, I looked at the systemic issues going on with nonprofit leaders. There are a lot of systemic challenges and really, I would say, arguably injustices that are happening against nonprofit leaders. Everything from pay disparities to a significant lack of leadership development investment. For example, based on one stat, less than 1% of foundation dollars have historically gone towards leadership development. Well, what's interesting is that if you look at the for-profit sector, they spend 4 times more on leadership development than nonprofits do. And whenever I'm talking to a business group of people, it's almost there's an expectation of investing in leaders, right? Especially in the entrepreneurial community and people who are in those small, scrappy startup, whether you're nonprofit or for-profit, but especially on the for-profit side, it's almost like an expectation that you're part of 2 or 3 mastermind communities, which are really leadership development, right? It's being in a community of people that you're growing and learning around how to be a better entrepreneur and leader of a company. Well, in the nonprofit space, it's the complete opposite of that. Not only is there a lack of investment, but there's also this belief that if we're investing in ourselves as leaders, it's almost like we're stealing from the mission. And that comes from the system to me, because if we're looking at some of the scrutiny on our 990s around our quote unquote overhead, and certainly some of you probably seen Dan Pallotta's old TED talk about the overhead myth, but it's very true. And those are really injustices happening against us because on one hand, nonprofits, when we're a part of communities, everybody gets to benefit, right? Violence rates go down, literacy rates go up, hunger goes down. All these things are better for the community for the most part. And everybody gets to take advantage of it. And then while on the other side, as a whole, the system is scrutinizing, why are you spending that money on this? AKA leadership development, which is underneath a world of overhead. On the business world, that's infrastructure. That's not overhead, that's infrastructure. And so there's a lot of these injustices. So anyway, I realized systemically there are so many injustices, and there's even more. I won't go into all of them, but that are happening against nonprofit leaders. And so the system weighs us down. But then organizationally, one of the organizations that I'm speaking about with this burnout story is they had a vision for the world that they didn't live in to themselves. They were not creating impact from the inside out. They were trying to create impact on the outside while not living that way on the inside. A great quote from Fred Kaufman, who comes out of MIT, said, when the gap between who we say we are and how we act, the wider that gap is, it becomes no greater of a corruption of an organization's soul. I botched the quote a little bit, but I think you all get what I'm saying. And so when we don't live in this creating impact from the inside out, it creates a lot of strain on the nonprofits themselves, on the leaders within it. And so you have the system and you have the organization, but then I realized I had my own issues. And I mentioned earlier, I was pretty idealistic. And I realized that if I don't balance idealism with realism, they both are needed in our space. And I was so heavy on the idealism that I didn't really understand what was really happening in reality. And again, I think both are needed, and it's a healthy balance that nonprofit leaders need to have of idealism and realism. As an old pastor once told me, if you were disillusioned, what was the illusion you believed in the first place? And so for me, it was a really helpful awakening of my own, of realizing I really need to grow in who I am as a leader and be more clear and more honest with myself. And so anyway, I've continued to, of course, unpack that burnout story. And there are many other factors involved in it. But that's when I met a gentleman a little bit later who came from large institutional nonprofits. His name was Kevin Hagan. He was one of my co-founders, or he is my co-founder. And he had just stepped down as the CEO of the American Diabetes Association. And he and I just really connected on this fact that what is going on? Like, he had a very similar story to me. And I came from sort of small, scrappy nonprofits, and realizing this is an epidemic of burnout in nonprofit leadership. And so that's literally why we started Thrive Impact and called it Thrive Impact, which is how do we go upstream with nonprofit leaders and help them to thrive so that they can have the impact that they're setting out to have and our communities really need from them. That's why they exist in the first place. Because as you said, burnout is the enemy of creating positive change. And so how do we help nonprofit leaders to thrive from the inside out?
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing and kind of sharing those three levels. And we're going to unpack it all because I think we agree on a lot of things. And especially when it comes to leadership development. And like you said, I always say fundraising is an inside job. If you're not taking care of your people, if people aren't taking care of themselves, then the organization's going to suffer. I've said this on a few other podcasts. I had working in a shelter serving people experiencing homelessness, like case managers being adamant about driving their clients to doctor's appointments, but they hadn't been to a doctor's appointment in years because they felt selfish taking that time. And because they didn't, they had flare-ups and things were going wrong. And so organizations don't allow for that time, or it's scrutinized to take that time for yourself. But it's so important for the mission to, like your organization, thrive, to invest in those people. So I want to unpack that a little bit of like, how can organizations, and maybe in the work that you do, like I've seen this as well, like they're living their values on the outside, not embracing it on the inside. Like, how can they shift that into an internal culture that embodies what what their mission is?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a loaded question of how do nonprofits leaders thrive? I'll start with this. I think I can't remember who said this, but it was real change really starts with radical honesty. And one of the things that we're learning and continuing to learn in our work, and the data supports this too, around building workplaces, and we call them learning organizations, and workplaces that allow for psychological safety, inclusion. Like we talk about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion all the time. And then we go and have a really crappy meeting of the silent majority and the vocal minority. We don't think about how this translates right here, where we have DEI panel of 4 people, and then we have 75 people in the room and nobody heard their voice. There's a shift in our whole operating system. It's like going from a PC to a Mac, right? It's like a whole different operating system. And thinking into how do we actually develop the type of skills that we need to, what we like to say is co-create our futures. There's a guy named Peter Senge who's been one of our teachers through his own work. He also actually comes out of MIT. And he was one of the original people who coined the term learning organization. And I was watching a video of his. He was actually talking to a bunch of educators. And he said from his mentor, who was one of the big high up guys at Toyota, apparently, Dr. Deming is his name, said that the prevailing system of management is destroying our people because the prevailing system of management is about control and not about learning. And he starts to go into this journey and this approach of asking people, hey, just curiosity. And he's talking to educators, right? Did you know how to learn before you went to school? Did you know how to learn before you went to school? And well, we do. Like, we learned how to walk, right? And what was learning like before school started? What was learning about? I'm curious your thoughts, Haley, actually. What was learning about when you were learning things like how to walk, as an example? What was learning about?
I have 3 kids under 4, so we're
Yeah,
all,
so you know.
it's fun to see it through their eyes, but a lot of it is learning by doing or exploring or playing. Like they're learning by just doing it and
Yes.
trying it, and they might fall down, but they get back up and they try to walk again. It's learning by doing and learning by playing.
hmm You're exactly right. And as he was saying, is we have this inherent joy of learning already built in as human beings. And then there's a good chance that you and I, Haley, went to the same school, and many of us who are listening went to the same school. When we joined school at 5 or 6, what did we discover it was about? Who had the answers?
Mm-hmm.
Did we have the answers? No, we didn't have the answers. The teacher had the answers, right? Whereas before, who had the answers? Well, we did through learning, right? Through doing, through trying, through falling down, right? To your point. And he really started to hit the point of the industrial form of management, which starts when we're in school and goes all the way through to where we're inside of organizations and we have bosses, that is much more about performance for somebody else's approval than it is about learning. And if we look at that in our work as nonprofit leaders, in any organization really, a lot of the things that we've been noticing are these conditions of these top-down leadership approaches that tend to be about control, hence why they're top-down, that the leaders are the ones who have the answers, right? Similar to like teachers are the ones who have the answers. And then what does everybody else have? Well, apparently not the answers, right? They're just the followers. But as Peter Senge was saying, that's destroyed our people. Because our approach, and you were part of the Awakening Conscious Leadership experience, my mentor, Dr. Danny Friedland, he was the reason for that happening in the first place. He said, if we want to lead well, the first place we need to lead well is within ourselves. And how do we create the conditions that allow for us to be leaders? And what he was saying about leadership is that leadership is not a role. Now, we all have different roles, right? I'm a CEO of Thrive Impact, as an example. That just means I have a certain function to play, but it doesn't mean that I'm a leader or not. Like the question he was saying is that you not have influence, regardless of your role within an organization. You not have influence. So the question is not whether or not you're a leader. The question is, what type of influence are you having? And we do this really fun exercise that we actually did at ACLE as well, which invites people to, whether they're entry level in a nonprofit all the way through to the CEO, to the board chair, we invite the whole organization sometimes into this particular exercise, which is, we'd like you to find an artifact in your room. And we do a lot of stuff on Zoom, so this is partly why this works too. That represents when you're a least effective leader and represents when you're a most effective leader. And right off the bat, by doing that, what we're doing is we're saying every single one of you are actually leaders in this organization, because every one of you have influence. And you already know you have influence because everybody in that call is able to say when they're a least effective leader and when they're a most effective leader. Every single person. We have not had one time, and I've done this for thousands and thousands of people. We have not had one time where somebody was like, I don't know. Because we all have a lived experience, right? Because we've learned by doing, right? We've learned, like when we were kids, we've actually learned by doing, but we haven't realized that's actually what's happening.
Yeah.
And then we relegate leadership to those people. Or if we are those people, we then think that we are those people. And now we're in this space of control as opposed to the space of learning. And so that's where a lot of what we believe is nonprofit leadership for the next normal is that we must have a dual interest in both what's happening on the outside in our teams, in our organizational structures, as well as what's happening on the inside. And that's where that quote I was mentioning earlier is, we need to lead well from within. We need to be able to create the conditions and understand, when are we in reactivity? When am I actually going back down based on the neuroscience from Dr. Daniel Friedland, when am I going back down into those spaces in my brainstem of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? And I have a lot of personal experiences around this. As a CEO, for example, revenue is a really important part of our work, right? As is with every other nonprofit. And we do revenue type of workshops. We have a culture of revenue workshop that we do with organizations for them to help them to really reflect on how they're building a culture of revenue. But I didn't realize how much of a culture of revenue inside of Thrive Impact I was creating around isolation.
Mm.
And I'll say this very honestly, I've had some healing experiences this year that really helped me to understand what was really going on inside of me. What was really happening, that I was in reactivity so much because I believed what I feel like is now a lie, that leaders' job is to have the few who have the answers. An old paradigm that's been sitting there for so long, that industrial age form of management, that is that belief that the few are the ones who have the answers. And then if I don't have the answer, then what happens? Well, crap. And so I started spiraling into spirals of guilt and shame. And then I realized, like, oh, wait a second. I literally had just, I remember the moment too. I literally had just taught on that whole concept of leadership is not about the few who have the answers. It's actually about engaging the many and the power of great questions, hence co-creation. And then I had this moment where I felt all this anxiety come up inside of me because we were going through a cash flow crunch. And I remember thinking, like, why don't I have the answer? What's wrong with me? Maybe I'm not the right person for this job. All imposter syndrome, all this stuff just started coming up. And then I realized, wait a second. I literally just taught on this. My job is not to have the answer. It's to co-create with my team. And that's where I realized that one of the areas of burnout around leadership, and especially those who are in the stereotypical roles of leaders, CEOs and VPs and C-level and whatever, is the space of being the few who have the answer is a very isolating space. It's super lonely. And it's actually not how we're meant to do it. We're meant to co-create. In fact, our neuroscience speaks to that in order to come up with a strategy, we need to go through belonging first. Most of us, when we come up with strategy, this is why there's a cliche about strategic plans sitting on the shelf gathering dust in the nonprofit world, right? Because so many people come up with strategy first without doing the belonging, meaning inviting the voices, creating the buy-in. So they do strategy and then try to get buy-in on the back end. When if we can do buy-in on the front end and belonging, AKA invite people into questions, invite people into the process, open up the aperture, and then co-create our future, it makes the strategies that much better, that much more clear. And then as we get into rhythms around that type of approach, it really starts to reduce our own burnout because we start getting out of isolation. And so that's where I've been learning so much more in my own lived experience as a learner on this journey still, of realizing how many places I still put myself into these spaces of isolation because since I was 5 years old, I've been a part of a system that's told me that's how it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where this outer work of how do we co-create is so important. And this inner work of really having radical honesty with ourselves about what's really going on within ourselves. Where am I isolating myself? Where am I isolating our teams? Where am I in reactivity? And where is that reactivity creating more harm than it is good? Because not all reactivity is bad. Our brain stems are built for that, right? It's kept us alive sometimes. But that's a question too for reflection, especially for your listeners. And we do this in our workshops, is think about a time in your life right now where you might be in a space of reactivity, where you're in that space of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And what's going on in that situation? And is that reactivity creating more harm than good for you and for those around you? Then we flip the script a little bit, which is, so let's say a year from today, you want to be celebrating this shift. What would a story of transformation look like in your world around this particular scenario? What would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like? How would you even approach it? And we all have those times. Like, I've got 4 kids. You've got 3 kids. Like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have kids. And even if you don't, we've all had these moments where we're in reactivity mode and we come into our workplaces with reactivity. And what does reactivity perpetuate? More reactivity. It's trigger, react, right? We see it whenever 2 of my 4 kids just start going at each other, right? It's just this big spiral downwards of a big spiral of reactivity. So anyway, that being said, it's this inner work and this outer work that we need to have a dual interest in what's really going on and lean into this new operating system that gets us out of the industrial form of management that is destroying people and leading to way more burnout, and into this space of co-creation, into the space of conscious leadership, like you mentioned, that allows for us to be honest with ourselves to say no to the things that we need to let go of so that we can say yes to the most important things and then co-create what that looks like for our teams.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfeld, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC Masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today. Wow, Tucker, you are so brave. And thank you so much for being so vulnerable about your own experience and how it's a continual healing and learning. But just taking that first step of awareness is just so amazing that you were able to just be aware of it and then start to shift your mindset around how you're leading your organization. And it just shows how you really embody the work that you do. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into a few areas. But one, you were talking about a culture of revenue and co-creation, and something I've been exploring with, and I would love your idea of, I've worked in nonprofits as a fundraiser for 12 years, and we always talk about building a culture of philanthropy. But I think that's an outdated term. And something that I've been exploring is what if instead, to the point of buying and belonging, like what if instead we create a culture of connection that will help then raise more revenue? And that's the approach. I have boards come to me. I have staff come to me and be like, teach our people how to fundraise. And I'm like, they don't need more fundraising trainings. What they need is to be connected to each other, understand how important they are to the mission, understand how important they are to each other and how their roles impact the greater purpose that the organization sets out to achieve. So I would love your input into how can organizations, and again, this is a loaded question, but I don't know if you could break it down into a few ways that you help organizations do this, build that co-creation in a culture of connection.
Yeah. Well, part of it is learning like I mentioned earlier, is the operating of co-creation itself, or the operating system of co-creation. One of the main methodologies we use, which by the way is actually one of the most powerful methodologies for fundraising, especially if you're in the major donor side of the world, but in general, which it is a methodology called appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry, like any sort of change methodology, it has a storied history. It started, I want to say, back in the 80s with a guy named Dr. David Cooperrider when he was a PhD student. He was doing work with the Cleveland Clinic. And he realized that when we're trying to make change, and if you're a fundraiser, you're trying to get somebody to do something they're not doing right now, aka give us money, right? He said the power of our questions are really important. And one of the things that I love about appreciative inquiry, around being such a really key piece of this operating system around co-creation, is it's a very strengths-based approach. And I'll give you a really simple example from my own life. And that kind of speaks to this. And what's interesting about it is it goes against our own biology too. And this is where appreciative inquiry kind of strays from your typical change management SWOT analyses. Is our biology, again, going back to our brainstem, is looking for the threat. It's looking for the problem. What's wrong? What's broken? What's missing? What are the issues? And how do we solve them? But perhaps there's some better questions we might ask. And there's a couple of different case studies that we use a lot of times in our work. And but the simple story I was going to share is I have a daughter who came home from school. She's in high school. And she came home from school and had a report card. We've all been in that situation. If we have kids in school, here comes the report card. Okay, let's see what it is. And she had 3 A's, a B, and a C in social studies. So, okay, here I am, right? I'm having that parent moment. I'm sitting there before I say anything. Okay, I know where to go. I know what to do. Facilitated thousands of conversations about this. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Hey, Addie, why do you have a C? I go immediately to the problem, quote unquote, whatever that problem, the problem I believe is a problem, which I actually don't believe is a problem, by the way, but I go immediately to the issue. Well, I know that based upon both the science and the data behind appreciative inquiry, as well as very much our own lived experience in working with hundreds of nonprofits, is that if we're able to go to the A, and I'm able to ask Addie about the A and say, hey, Addie, how did you get those A's? Tell me about that. What were the rhythms that you were in? How did you show up? How did your teacher show up? What were the conditions that allowed for those A's to be A's? That is a much better approach and a much better way of helping her to get her C up than if I just go and ask her about the C. But then, Haley, think about this from a very human level. If I was to ask you about your C's, how would you feel?
Probably feel shame and guilt.
Yeah, totally.
Embarrassed. Yeah.
But if I ask you about your A's, what does that feel like?
Prideful. And yeah.
Yeah, you
like
probably
confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, oh, yeah, it's your strength. And this is where appreciative inquiry is a strengths-based approach to change. Strength is really, in fact, Peter Drucker used to say this, strength is all we have to build on, really. And the job of leadership, which is really all of you, as we just reframed leadership, is to create such an alignment of strengths. This is an old Peter Drucker quote too. Is to create such an alignment of strengths that makes the system's weaknesses irrelevant. So you're not looking at the weaknesses, you're looking at the strength. Another case study in this is an old famous case study around an airline. It's another approach to questions. This is a particular airline that had baggage problems, meaning people would show up at the airline or at the airport, and we've all done that. We've shown up at the airport on the other side and where are my bags, right? Like their bags aren't there. And they had this at scale, right? They had this on an ongoing challenging problem, as an ongoing challenging problem. And so the question that they originally asked, which is, well, how do we solve our baggage problem? Perfectly legitimate, logical question. One we've all asked ourselves, right? What's wrong? What's broken? What's missing? And how do we solve it? We're all problem solvers, right? We fix problems in the world, especially as nonprofit leaders. There's pain and we solve it. But then the appreciative inquiry guides came about and helped them to rethink this and saying, what if we asked a better question that actually got us not only what we want, which is to problem solve, but actually what we really want, which is excellence. So instead of asking, how do we solve our baggage problem? They asked the question, how might we create an exceptional arrival experience? What they're really saying is, what do we really want here? Because if all we do is ask questions around solving a problem, then let's say if we are able to solve the problem, it just gets us back to neutral. But if we ask a different question, it changes the future before the future even arrives. If we ask that different question, well, what do we even want in the first place? We did this with a board of directors and one time, and we do this all the time, but this particular one was a really poignant story because this board, I'm curious, how many of your listeners have toxic boards or struggled boards or lack of engaged boards or whatever, right? Boards
Probably
are
a lot of them.
a lot of, yeah. And what was fascinating about this particular board is we did this anonymous survey ahead of time. Many times we'll do anonymous surveys ahead of time just to get a real clear pulse check and honest pulse check of where an organization is. One of the questions or the statements that had the answer key was 1 is strongly disagree, 2 is disagree, 3 is neutral, 4 is agree, and 5 is strongly agree. And the statement was there is a strong level of trust that exists among the board members. So there were 7 members on this board. 5 of them put strongly disagree. 5 out of 7. 1 put disagree and 1 put neutral. Nobody agreed with the fact that there was trust among the board members.
Oh, goodness.
So when you talk about toxicity, what do you do with that? We leveraged appreciative inquiry and we invited them into one, what are you noticing about your survey results? And particularly, we asked them, what strength do you notice is in there? And then we invited them into the future, which is, what is it that you want? A year from today, what do you want to be celebrating about your board? Because I guarantee you, nobody wants to be on a board like that. And yet here they all are sitting there being angry or pissed off or in a space of lack of trust, toxicity, no psychological safety. But nobody wants that. And so we can start to help them to co-create and understand through the power of a generative question and a strengths-based question, what is it that you want? A year from today, what do you want to be celebrating about your board and how you show up for one another? And there's some really powerful research by a guy named Dr. Benjamin Hardy, who shares that when we are able to capture the textures and the images and just what does that future really look like as best as we possibly can, it almost becomes pavers for our current present reality to build the pathway that we want. Because otherwise, if we're sitting here in this toxicity and we're just saying, well, how do we solve this problem? Now we're having a bunch of really tough subjective conversations about mostly blaming people and not blaming process, mostly not having any idea, well, what is it that we want in the first place? Just looking at how do we solve a problem. And so when we invited them into that, they started to put down things like joyful culture. They started to write, and this was the beginning for them of co-creating their board culture. And then we invited them back down into the present. Well, so how might we then get there? What are some of the roadblocks that might be getting in our way from a process perspective? And how might we start getting there? And just by doing that sequence of questions and inviting all the voices into the room, it started to shift this culture, even right there in the room, because they were asking different questions. And so that's just give you an example of what does this co-creation look like? And how do we create these spaces of learning where, like when I asked Addie about her A's, I was able to help her to unpack those A's. I was able to help her unpack her strength, understand the nuances of it. Because most of the time it's just a process issue, right? And we're learning, what are the things that work for us? Where do we have energy? So those are some things. I'll pause there, but those are some of the things that come up for me around really looking at the power of our questions and how we engage in much better questions. Because I would say, I venture to say that how do we fix this problem is not as good of a question as what is it that we want a year from today that will help us to start to understand what is it that we even want. So now we can actually move in the direction that we want.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I love the appreciative inquiry approach and the power of generative questions. And in the training that we did, I love that I'm not a very good drawer, so I did not share my drawing. It was all stick figures, but we did, what is your current reality? And then what do you want your future to look like? And just putting it on, like my current reality was trying to work, cook, clean, while I have 3 kids pulling my way and trying to like have a relationship. And my future was like living in the mountains and playing in the dirt, like having simplicity and not having as much overwhelm. And just writing it down, it like helped me like be like, oh, I think once you speak it out too, or dream together, that's part of the co-creation, because you realize, oh, I'm not in this alone. Yeah. And my reality, that co-creation of that reality can be possible.
Yeah. I remember the first time I did that exercise, it was so visceral and powerful for me. And I love that it's a drawing exercise, even if you're not a great drawer, right? To your point, the point is not you being a great drawer. The point is we're actually activating a different part of your senses and a different part of your brain that doesn't necessarily process language, but it can process things like pictures and whatnot. And it activates a different part of your brain. And I remember the first time I did that. And I remember the house that I drew. And we were like in this little living room, and there was like this little beam of light that was coming out, but it was like a really small beam, but our room was like full of light. And I was like, I was living in this space of a lot of light, but I felt not very much of it was getting out, and it was bothering me. And it actually it was really frustrating for me. And then my picture of a life well lived was of really co-creating and building a bridge that allows people to get out of their burnout, cross the bridge and then come back around and build the better bridge. So it was like this co-created bridge of people in a continual learning journey of building bridges for other people. And it was just like so visceral to me of thinking about even our work at Thrive Impact. And when we do this with organizations, it really helps people to both feel it from the inside. And that was like, that particular exercise was specific to you as an individual. You can also do that as, what is your current life in your organization? What is the current life of your organization? And what is a life well lived of your organization? You can reshift the frame of it, doing it organizationally too, and invite people into that and see where there's resonance and see where there may be alignment, or maybe see where there's not alignment too. And that's actually a really fascinating learning data point that you can use to be able to get a sense of, are we all going in the same direction? So anyway, there's a lot of activities like this that help to find where there's already alignment, to make the implicit way more explicit. That will allow for us to realize, and not only where we're aligned, but frankly, sometimes I go back to thinking about boards too. Sometimes board members need to be able to opt out and be like, you know what? This is not the time. I can't tell you how many conversations. In fact, we just had one yesterday with an organization. We're going to be doing a 3-hour board retreat on Zoom, and board engagement was the biggest issue. And what we're doing, typically, that's not the root cause, is engagement. That's like a symptom of whatever else is going on. And many times culture follows structure. And what we realized is that they had these spirals of disengagement, because what was happening is the ED was not really trusting that the board would be engaged. And so she didn't even think about them when she came up with things like organizational goals. But then the board's not really engaged. And so it perpetuates that spiral of reactivity, like we were talking earlier. And so, oh, well, they're not really engaged. And then I proved myself right because I tried to have them to the board meeting, and then half the people showed up, but then they don't really engage. And so it just feels gross and icky. But really, it's not a people issue. It's a structure and a process issue. We haven't learned how to effectively create engagement and figure out where people want to have choice and energy around where they want to engage in the board. And so it's been really fascinating to see this type of an approach create a lot of engagement, because it actually unlocks a lot of choice and a lot of belonging in the process.
Yeah, I've seen it on boards as well. And one specifically hired me because I'm a CFRE, and they wanted to fundraise the board. Typical, wasn't engaged, wasn't fundraising, had capacity, had networks, but just wasn't doing anything. And what I found was it was an emotional disconnection issue. So and again, there was like fighting on the board, and it's because everyone was in that state of reactivity, that their amygdalas, their brainstem had taken over.
Yeah.
And they couldn't collaborate. They couldn't communicate. They couldn't be creative and solve a simple issue that they were like, it's one of those things where you're like staring at something for so long, like you can't get past it. And they're just running on this hamster wheel of reactivity and negative cycle. And it was no one to blame. It was just they had continually felt alone and not seen and heard with each other. And so they got into that negative cycle. And so I was able to, even before we got to fundraising, because I was like, we got to get you back on track with each other.
Yeah.
And they were able to voice their fears, voice their needs. And when people felt less alone and that they heard each other, they were able to actually make those critical decisions they needed to raise more revenue. And so, but I think it is that important piece of feeling that belonging and leading well from within, like you said, from Dr. Danny Friedland. So as we end, I would love to know, what are some tips that you can give? Because obviously, like you said, it's 3 levels: systems, organizations, and we talked a lot about the organizational level, but on that personal level, how can we really instill that sense of belonging within ourselves?
Ooh, that's another loaded question, but I think
those are all the loaded questions I'm asking today.
I love your questions. Well, I'll go back to what Dr. Danny taught me, which is in conscious leadership, which is what his book is about. And it's called Leading Well from Within, by the way, if anybody wants to go find it. It's a great book. It's very accessible, has good data and good stories in it. And the subtitle of it is A Neuroscience and Mindfulness-Based Framework for Conscious Leadership. And if you look at it, the neuroscience part is like more of an understanding of how we function, literally, like how our brains work. But the mindfulness is the tool. And the core that he had for mindfulness, and there's a lot of mindfulness stuff that's out there. It was really helpful because it was so simple, is pause, notice, and choose. And one of the things that there's a book that I love called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Oh, I've read that one.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
good
actually
one.
by a pastor out in the West Coast, I think. Yeah, he's on the West Coast. And one of the biggest issues that we're facing, and that is one of the biggest problems for us, is that we're doing too many things. We're in too much of a hurry. And he was actually saying in the book that hurry is the opposite of love. Hurry is the opposite of care. And so if you think about that, hurry is the opposite of love for others. And by the way, Dr. Danny used the word love too, as the neuroscientist. So in case you're wondering if that feels too fluffy for you, no, there's actually data behind that too. But hurry is the opposite of these things. And that's why I loved pause was at the beginning of Pause, Notice, Choose. Because pause is creating spaces of reflection. It's creating spaces to not hurry. To realize and to be able to now notice. And I love the word notice because it's such a non-judgmental word. It helps for us to differentiate from our circumstances and realize and look in on, instead of I am angry, I am noticing that I am angry. That's actually a really important difference. And the more that we can create that pause to allow us to notice what's really going on inside of us, then it allows us to be in, hence conscious leadership, to be in choice around one of Danny's favorite questions was, what matters most now? And sometimes, and I want to give my son, who's 14, some kudos here. He and I were having a really tense conversation the other day. I realized, by the way, I was in reactivity. I was not listening. I was getting snappy. I was in a hurry, actually. This is what happened. And he paused and actually with tears in his eyes, he said, Dad, I can't have this conversation right now. Can we have it later? And that was such a powerful choice. And with his dad, what courage. And I was the one in reactivity and he chose to break that cycle. It was so beautiful. And I have so much appreciation for his courage there, because what his conscious choice was to, I need to actually step away from the situation because otherwise I can't keep processing right now. And that's what mattered most. That was important because he cares about our relationship. And it was really powerful. And it was really powerful for me of realizing, wow, I'm in too much hurry right now. I need to pause. Notice what's really going on. Where am I triggered? What's really happening? And reflecting within myself. So I would say that's the biggest thing is creating spaces of pause. He actually used to say, pause, breathe, notice, choose, which I liked. That was how he used to always say it. And then we simplified it to pause, notice, choose. I really learned a lot of breath work and the healing force of our breath. That, again, not fluffy stuff. This is real data-driven science. The power of our breath, literally when we are able to breathe deeply and elongate our out breath, make it go out a lot slower, it actually helps us to come into balance in our nervous system. It engages the parasympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system is what's all the stresses and the anxiety. And so it actually creates a balance to allow us to notice in order to choose. And so pause, breathe, notice, choose was this really powerful frame for me that I recommend everybody practicing. Because the more you start noticing, the more you start noticing and you start to realize, wow, I'm in a lot more reactivity than I ever thought I was because I never paused enough to even notice what was happening.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that interaction with your son. And just, I love the neuroscience and the data and just the reality of how this stuff works and can really change your life. I've been doing breath work for a while now, and I'm actually in that 40-day Kundalini breath work challenge.
Oh, you are? Yeah, it's great.
It's challenging, but it really has changed my life. And I love that you're teaching the next generation how to have these generative conversations so that they can lead well as they're the next leaders of the future. In the essence of pausing and just slowing down, what are you enjoying right now as you take those moments of pause? What's something that's lighting you up or bringing you joy?
Well, we've been going through this journey inside of Thrive Impact based on actually one of Dr. Benjamin Hardy's books called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And what I love about it is it's the opposite of the hustle culture, or in the nonprofit world, it's like our own version of hustle culture is do more, right? In the entrepreneurial world, it's do more to make more. And what it really is, 10X is not about doing more. It's actually about doing a whole lot less. He really hits on radical honesty with yourself and rethinking time altogether. And so what I'm really excited about is we've been going through a co-creative process within Thrive and our team this summer, and we're culminating to get to our first version of what that looks like, kicking off in September from a rhythms perspective in terms of our check-ins and our rhythms around how we do our work. And I love it because I'm realizing it's allowing me to get more settled into who I'm meant to be as a part of this organization and others' strengths. This goes back to that alignment of strengths that I talked about from Peter Drucker, that I've been learning how to let go of so many things because I've been having more radical honesty with myself and inviting others to have radical honesty with me too. I don't need to have strengths in all the things. Like Julie, our director of operations, she has some radical strengths that are not mine. And thank the Lord for her. Thank you for Sarah. And thank you for Alan. And thank you for Aaron and Nico. And I'm grateful for the strengths that these people are bringing that I don't necessarily need to have, nor do I need to pretend like I need to have. And so I'm really excited about our organizational 10X meeting with my own individual 10X fitting within the organization's 10X. It's freeing, frankly. But it also is clunky and awkward at the same time because it's unlearning old ways. And sometimes, like I was telling Sarah, our chief of impact yesterday, okay, that was really awkward. I was trying to figure out how to do this thing that I've been working on around my 10X. I'm just being radically honest about, that's what I just noticed was happening because we have a learning environment and we have a joke inside of Thrive, which is, it's all learning, isn't it? Maybe it's all just learning. Is it all learning? Yeah, it's all learning. So that's what I'm mostly excited about right now is we've been around for 5.5 years and we're really starting to, we've had a lot of work underneath our belt that we're coming into really honed. This is why we're here type of an experience. And that's really exciting to me.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, where can people follow along on your journey as you start to embrace this idea?
Oh, well, we'll start to update things, at least on our website at a minimum, thriveimpact.org. But Sarah and I actually tend to talk about a lot of this on our podcast, like what we're learning. We have a podcast called Thrivers, Nonprofit Leadership for the Next Normal. And it's really a space that we debrief a lot of what we're going through. Not always. We have pretty clear, and we'll have guests on and stuff like that. But it's also like a space for us to debrief what we're learning. And so sometimes we get really vulnerable about what's really going on here around our own personal journeys within it. So that is definitely one place that people can check it out as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tucker, for having this conversation with me. You are such a gift to me and everyone that you come in contact with. And I'm just so grateful for you.
Thank you, Haley. And thank you for your presence and for the work that you do. I loved your story about the board. And I think if more people can do what you're doing and to help create healing inside of organizations like that, that is an incredible thing. So thank you for the work that you're doing too.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.